2 years ago, on June 8th, the Six-Day War was climaxed by a ceasefire between Israel and Egypt. But the fighting has never stopped. Since then, not a week has passed without fresh violence. Each new clash could precipitate a new war between the Jews and the Arabs. In Jerusalem 2 months ago, Israel chose a new prime minister, a dynamic, defiant defender of Israel's interests. Our guest today, in an exclusive Issues and Answers presentation, interviewed at her home in Tel Aviv, Mrs. Golda Meir. Mrs. Meir will talk with ABC Rome Bureau Chief Barry Dunsmore and ABC Middle East Bureau Chief Russ Jones.
Madam Prime Minister, welcome to Issues and Answers. Both of us were here 2 years ago, and we remember very clearly the excitement in the air, the jubilation among the people about the victory that had been won, the feeling that peace had finally come. Now it's 2 years later. We certainly don't have peace. What do we have? Are we drifting toward another war?
No, I believe not. Although some of us were quite optimistic 2 years ago. There was a third war that was forced upon us. We had won all of them. And I think you said it rightly. The jubilation was not because of a military victory, but because we thought that this really paved the way this time to peace. But our neighbors will it otherwise. So we don't have peace. I don't think we're drifting towards war. Our borders are more secure. It is more difficult for our neighbors to attack us, and therefore I think that they won't easily do this folly again, because I think they know very well that there's no victory in store for them. It can only be more misery for us, but also for them. And if they have any responsibility left at all, I don't think they will do it.
Your position is, and has been all along, that another war is not imminent, but General Dayan recently said that he didn't know how much longer the Israeli army could hold and maintain its defensive position. Was this in any way a hint that perhaps another preemptive strike was about to take place?
No, I don't think so. Our position is that there was a war. There was an end of the war. There was a ceasefire that all of the parties agreed to, and as far as we are concerned, we meant it, and we mean it now. And we are, of course, we want peace, but as long as there's no peace, we're perfectly willing, be happy to live up to the ceasefire requirements. But that is only on condition that this works on both sides. Therefore, it depends upon our neighbors whether they will be quiet on the borders or not. And I don't think, I'm sure, that that isn't what General Dayan meant, that on our initiative something is bound to happen. We've said right along we don't want to add up victories. We just don't want war, that's all.
I have spent a lot of time in Egypt over the past 2 years, and I know that the Egyptians fear that Israel might strike again first, and much of their preparations at the moment are defensive nature to prevent this kind of thing. The Russians have spent an awful lot of money for this. What could you say to the Egyptians to assure them that you will not attack first?
Well, all they have to do, they and people from the outside of this area, is just not to forget what happened 2 years ago. What happened in May 1967. Out of the blue, he was sending his army into the Sinai Desert, and bombers and tanks and guns and whatnot, closing the Straits of Tiran on the 23rd of May. So who was preparing an attack? Except that the Russians at that time were hammering away from Moscow in Arabic to all the Arab countries that we were about to attack Syria. Now, one night something very dramatic happened. At 2:40 in the morning, the Russian ambassador demanded to see the Prime Minister immediately, Mr. Eshkol. And So Mr. Jaffer arranged it that they should come immediately to his hotel. He was in Tel Aviv. And when the ambassador came with a message, a warning that we should not attack Syria, the Prime Minister said to him, look, you have your car here, I have my car here. Let us go in one of these cars, drive straight up to the Syrian border and see what's happening there. And I mean, you can't hide an army on the Syrian border. It's not such a long border. And of course, the Soviet ambassador refused to go. God forbid, if he goes there, he may find out that there's no army there. So he didn't go. So this was all played up. And that's why we say that the Soviets are at least as responsible as Nasser is for the last war. Therefore, there can be no basis at all for Nasser rearming and preparing for fear of attack from Israel. That didn't happen in 67. There would have never been a war in 67 if it weren't for his initiative, and there won't be one now. That he can be absolutely assured.
Ms. Mayer, you mentioned the Russians. Do you think that they learned something out of 1967? Do you think they will restrain the Arab countries, Egypt and the others?
Well, I don't know what they will do, but I think they will have learned a lesson. I mean, this was a victory not over Nasser, but over his army and the weapons. And I think the Russians too will maybe think again, but of course nobody can foretell at any rate. I'm not prepared to foretell what the Russians may or may not do. One thing I think I can say quite definitely, I don't believe that the Russians honestly and sincerely want a quiet Middle East. In a quiet, peaceful Middle East, they suppose that they won't have very much to do.
Well, you've made it very plain, you and your government made it very plain that you want no part of the Big Four talks or even the Big Two talks. What role do you see the major powers playing in the Middle East? Do they have a role?
I think those that really want peace in the Middle East, for instance, like the United States, England, I believe can have a role, should have a role, and that is to do whatever they can, whatever there is in their power, in order to influence the Arab heads of state that by this time they should begin to reason, and that the only solution for the problem is to get together with the Israelis and come to a peace agreement. Because really nothing else will solve the problem. As long as Nasser is not prepared to sit down with us and come to an agreement with us, then this is the best proof that he doesn't want peace, that he's not prepared to live with us in this area as peaceful neighbors. Whether he likes us or not, whether he would wish that we had never been here, that's a different matter. But now after 20 years, over 20 years, 3 wars, all kinds of border incidents in between the wars, by this time, and for the good of his people, not only for the good of Israel, but if he cares enough for his people, by this time he should come to a conclusion that this is it, we're in the area, they are in the area, let us live in peace, and I'm convinced that once there is peace, this will become a different region.
Israel certainly has left no doubt in anyone's mind that it opposes the Big Four talks and the Big Two talks. Is this perhaps because you fear that the Nixon administration might sell you out?
No, that isn't. We never thought of that. We know that the friendship between Israel and the United States is something that has been constant throughout the years. It doesn't change between one administration and the other. We have no reason whatsoever to think that President Nixon is less concerned with the welfare of Israel and the security of Israel than any other president that came before him. But that isn't the reason at all. The reason is, as I said before, as long as the Arab leaders had not made up their mind, and it is only they that can take that decision, that they also want the end of all wars. Therefore, they have to meet us. If they can't overcome this block to sit down with us, then nobody can do it for them. They must be made to face their responsibilities to their people, not to Israel, but to their people. Now, I think anybody that comes to Israel realizes that despite the fact that we've had security problems and have security problems with the enormous burden that we carry, development in this country goes on. We don't see hungry people here, despite the fact that in 20 years we absorbed 1 million immigrants, actually refugees. You don't see anybody without a house. You don't see anybody bereft. You don't see any children out of school. The health situation is good. Of course, there are many other things that we would like to do instead of spending all the money for security. The situation in the Arab countries is quite different. Now, what has happened until now? After 1948, there was no peace. There were armistice agreements, demilitarized zones, UN observers. What did it do? It led immediately, or directly, let us say, to a war of '56, with border incidents right along. In '56, we were told and pressed in the United Nations and by the American government, by President Eisenhower, we should withdraw back from the borders, United Nations emergency force, this time it was to be. And they're going to guarantee also the free shipping through the Straits of Tiran. And I remember very well President Eisenhower going on television saying that the Israelis must step back, but he also said, and he said that if not, the United States would support sanctions against Israel, the United Nations. But he went on to say that if Israel complies, then there's no doubt that there must be also free shipping through the Suez Canal. And he added, and if not, the family of nations will have to deal with it. I'm convinced that President Eisenhower meant every word he said. But what were the facts? The facts were there's no free shipping through the Suez Canal, neither for Israeli boats nor for cargo, Israel cargo. What did the family of nations do about it? And what happened to the Straits of Tiran on the 23rd of May, 1967?
Mrs. Mayer, you said, in effect, that American promises, however well-intentioned, really don't amount to much. What can the United States do besides make more promises of the same nature?
Look, I have no complaints to the United States. As I said, I'm convinced President Eisenhower, President Truman before him, President Kennedy, President Johnson, every one of them, when they said that the United States is committed and is friend of Israel, is interested in the security of Israel, I never doubted any one of these things. And we never asked anybody to come and fight our battles for us. All we asked is that we should be prepared and equipped to defend ourselves so that we don't depend upon others, so that we don't call others to fight for us. And thank God we've done all this ourselves. And now all we ask of the United States, which is our big friend, best friend we have in the world, we appreciate it and know how to value it. All we ask is you use your influence not to make it easy for Nasser or for Hussein or for any of the other leaders, again, to escape their responsibilities and not sit down with us and negotiate a peace agreement.
I take it that you wouldn't believe that the so-called even-handed policy would be very effective in that area.
No, I don't want the United States to change its policy of being friends of Israel and friends of the Arab countries. I don't want I have no right to want it, and I don't expect it, and I don't ask that the United States should say, we are concerned only with Israel. Naturally, as countries